Welcome to the H Advisors Book Club. I can see and I've seen and said hello to a number of regulars, and it's fantastic to have you all back. We've had some fantastic events so far this year, and I see some new faces, which is even more exciting because it's then the word is clearly growing. And for a very, very special event tonight, and I'm so delighted that we're getting in before its formal launch tomorrow at the Royal Academy. So, as an old newsman, I like to be first with the news, not quite first with the news, but we're early with the news. John, my very old friend John Studzinski, who has written his book, A Talent for Giving. For those of you who are new tonight, John and I are going to have a chat, and I will ask him a few, what I hope are burning questions, and then I'll throw it open to everybody else. And then at the end, there's a copy of the book for all of you at the back. If you would be so moved, I'm sure, John, you'll be happy to sign a few copies. And there'll be a bit more to drink and a bit more to eat after formal proceedings have closed. This is, I'm particularly proud to do this evening because this is an extraordinary book. This is really a manual of how to make your life more meaningful, if that doesn't sound too trite. The title, A Talent for Giving, has been very well chosen, and we'll go into it. And it's about all of us who have talents and abilities that we can share with society, with others, to enrich our lives and enrich society. And at a time when society is very fractured and we can be living through some dark times, it has really quite a powerful message founded in John's Christian faith. I think really, rather than me tell you more about it, you could just look at the sort of people that are on the flyleaf, encouraging us all to read it, from James Dyson, Ken Follett, the Archbishop of Westminster, Theresa May, and Michael Bloomberg. That really does cover a pretty wide spectrum of public life. Now, I've known John for a good number of years, probably about sort of 35 years on and off.
Yeah, and at least that.
John is unique. He is, been a extraordinarily successful investment banker and investor, but who has combined that with a lifetime of giving. And I have been saying to people, he's possibly the only investment banker ever to appear on Radio 4's Thought for the Day. And possibly will be the only investment banker ever to do it in future.
I think I'm still in my pilot period, our trial period, but we'll see.
Yeah. So, John, first of all,
thank you.
Why did you write A Talent for Giving, and what is it about?
I don't know if any of you know Nigel Newton, but he's the founder of Bloomsbury. He's a very devout Catholic, and he's also a very assertive and persuasive force to be reckoned with. And about 3 years ago, I wrote an editorial. At Christmas time, newspapers encourage you to write editorials. I wrote an editorial for the New York Times, which was called, Become an Entrepreneurial Philanthropist. And it was really trying to motivate people, particularly young people, on how to sort of motivate their thoughts and mobilize their thoughts, rather, and put them to good use for a generous society. And I like to use the term sort of creating a sense of, common ground, using common sense for the common good. And I wrote this editorial. It got 500,000 hits, which at the time was good in the New York Times speak. 3 months later, the phone rings and Nigel says, "Studs, we saw this editorial. I had my team research it. They couldn't find a book anywhere like this. There's lots of books written on philanthropy. There's lots of books written by big philanthropists on their giving. There's lots of books written on why everybody's so generous, but there's no book written on the philosophy of how to be generous and how to do it yourself and tailor it to your own talents. So we'd like to commission you to write a book." And I said, "Nigel, I really think business must be really bad if you're trying to commission me." And I said, "I know you made a lot of money with Harry Potter, but this is you probably find other people." And he persevered over 3 months. And then ultimately he commissioned me to write the book. And I dictated it chapter by chapter. I sort of go into a zone and I pick a subset of an area that I was interested in. And the book is written not from cover to cover. I mean, you can read any chapter you want on your own and get a series of themes and messages that relate to giving. But I tried to structure it all around T's. And, you know, we all talk from the Bible about time, talent, and treasure. And everyone in this room associates giving and philanthropy. I don't like the word philanthropy. As a matter of fact, I stop into the book early on using the word philanthropy, and I use the word giving because, you know, I've organized a number of focus groups through Genesis over the last couple of years. And when you ask young people about philanthropy, their eyes glaze over and they think, philanthropy, well, that's something that very wealthy people do. That's something that people do with lots of money and they build buildings, but that's not me. And it's not something that young people can identify with. Secondly, when you ask young people what they're passionate about, in this day and age, particularly Gen Z, they're not passionate about many things. But most interestingly, when you ask them what they're angry about a lot of things. So part of this is channeling that anger with their talent to think how they can create a more generous society for the common good. Trying to arm people with this book so that they can use it as a tool to make some type of constructive change. Because one of the things I've discovered with young people is, you know, we call them the snowflake generation. And I've written about this in Thought for the Day. But the reality is the snowflake generation, they're very, very human. They're close to humanity, which means they're very close to God. And those people actually have a better insight into a lot of the things that motivate the human being. So it's really that group of people that I had in mind, people between the ages of 15 and 30, who learn to volunteer, learn to engage through so many different vehicles.
And that reading the book, because the book is not an autobiography by any means, but every now and then we catch glimpses of the younger John Studzinski in it. And it struck me that you discovered your talent for giving at an early age. Tell us a bit more about, you know, your work with the helpline.
Well, I mean, you know, I was raised in a very, very Catholic family. My parents were Polish immigrants. My grandmother helped build the Polish Catholic Church with her own money north of Boston. But when we were 6 years old, there were a lot of people who needed food in north of Boston. It was just a very poor area. So we created a soup kitchen. And we did it relatively expediently with the view you just get on and do it. And you don't necessarily need money. You mobilize the community. And what you find very quickly, if you have a problem and you have a project, you create a community that all engage in trying to find a solution, and then quickly the solution materializes. And that was my first experience when I was 6 years old.
And then it went on to the call center when in your teens.
Well, yeah, no. When I was 13, the JCs, which I don't know if we don't have the JCs, I don't think in the UK, but the JCs are very prevalent in all 49, 50 states in the United States. They came to me and they said, we'd like to have a project aimed at adolescents. And at that point in time, there was no information in 1968, I was 12 years old, for venereal disease information for adolescents. So we created, we went to the public health people in the state, we engaged a number of public health nurses, we engaged adolescents across America, and we created toll-free hotlines in 48 states, called it Operation Venus. And at the time, Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew were in the White House. And the billboards were, 1 out of every 4 people in the United States will get venereal disease at some point in their life. And we had the billboard of the president, the vice president, and their wives. And it got a lot of attention. No one was sued. But what happened was young people who didn't really know anything about sexually transmitted diseases used the hotline. And it became, this is long before anyone heard of AIDS, but it became a very quick movement, and it galvanized every state. And again, because it was done with a Catholic ethos, the thing is, when you have something like the Catholic ethos behind you, people have a hard time criticizing you because they assume if you're Catholic, there must be something good about it. That doesn't always, isn't always true. But we did set up the hotline. And I've had a couple of people, Anil, say to me, you know, the book is disappointing because I'd rather read 100 pages on how you set up the hotline and all the details and what you went through. And I said, well, if that was the case, I would have had to produce an 800-page book. And I don't think anyone in this room would be interested in reading an 800-page book. The chapters are short, and you can read them just before you go to bed.
And that's really what, this is more of a handbook, isn't it? This is because I think when we first started talking about this book, you said, you know, you wanted to, there we are, you wanted to create a movement. And so this is a how-to handbook. Is that what you set
Well, I think
out to do?
it's a philosophy of giving. Handbook makes it sound, it is a handbook for people that want to empower themselves to do more. And I mentor a lot of young people who come to me and say, I'd like to do more, but I don't have any money. And I say, yes, but you have time. But the most important thing you have is talent. And let's talk about your talent. And I think one of the things today is social media has sort of hijacked people's talent because people assume they don't have talent. They're reading about it, or they're reading about someone else's talent. But everyone has talent. And to a certain extent, if you cross-examine them, and I think everyone in this room, you have a moment in your life when somebody believed in you and identified some of your talent that actually resulted in a job or an internship or something that really helped transform your life. The same thing can apply to work that you can do for the common good.
And that word talent is not only in the title, but it's kind of shot through the whole book. I mean, the parable of the talents. And so, you know, I think that talent through this has a number of meanings, doesn't it?
Well, there's the parable of the talent in the Bible. And there's a lot of scripture in the book, so don't be turned off by that. But there's actually, whenever you don't know what to say, turn to the Bible. The Bible will tell you what to say because the Bible has some really good insights. But there's a wonderful parable of the talents where the boss gives one of his workers 5 talents and he invests it and produces 5. Then he gives the other worker 3 talents and he invests it and he produces 3 more. And then the third worker is given 1 talent and he doesn't think he has any skills at all, so he buries it. And then he's entirely chastised and told, why didn't you put it in the bank? You would have made a lot more money than bury your talent. And I think what happens is many young people today, actually, their best talents are often buried. And I think part of this book is aimed at helping people unearth their talent and use that talent in a way that they can actually enhance their self-esteem. The book tries to also aim, my experience in philanthropy and giving is, when I've worked with young people in volunteering, and Harriet and I've done this a lot in Genesis, and we've been doing Genesis now for 25 years, you'd be surprised, young people, when they realize they have talent, and they realize they can actually mobilize their talent, it does so much for their self-esteem. And then they realize they can mentor other people, and that does even more for their self-esteem. So you can actually help build people's characters through this whole experience of volunteering giving, because I think what people don't realize is, and I've realized it, you get the multiplier effect in volunteering your time is 5 or 10-fold. For everything you think you're giving, you're getting a multiplier back of 5 to 10 times. And you don't realize it until you're there within that human experience and within that human interaction. And I've advocated for a long time to have British schools and American schools embrace volunteering more into the national curriculum, where younger people have 10 or 11, 12 years old, spend at least just 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week volunteering, doing something where they can actually have some structure and understand what they're contributing to a specific project or program.
It's interesting the word talent, because the original, as you say in the book, the original meaning is of money,
Yes.
and currency, exactly. And you're a banker, you've been a very successful figure in banking and investment. And yet, and maybe because you've given a huge amount of your time to voluntary work and helping others. But Christianity has always had a very uneasy relationship with money and wealth. How do you balance those?
Well, I get asked this question a lot, and quite often, you'll be sitting next to someone at dinner, and someone will say, "So I understand you're Catholic," and I said, "Yes," and they said, "Well, I don't understand how you juxtapose being a good Catholic with being an investment banker," and I said, "Well, in both cases, the easy thing to say is, to whom much has been given, much is expected. So the more money you make, the more money you can give away." That's an easy one. The more complicated one is, how do you, I think the thing about money is that wonderful line in the Bible about taxes. And, when Christ says, whose head is on the coin? And it's Caesar. And Christ says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, which is the taxes, and give to God what's God's. So I think I've always tried to make a clear distinction. And then, of course, there's a lot peppered, even in the gospel in the last few days, the notion that the rich man will never go to heaven. What that really means, if you read the scripture carefully, is the obsession with accumulating wealth. It's not wealth, but it's the obsession with accumulating wealth, which is what the scripture is about, to the point where it becomes such an obsession that you ignore your common man and the common good. And that's really the focus of the scripture. So I'm very clear that, and I've actually given a lot of very wealthy people a very hard time who have a lot of money, and I say you should give more of it away. And of course, many of them are preparing to give away a lot of it before they leave the planet. Some of them, on the other hand, say to me, "John, my league table ranking in the wealth tables will decline if I give away too much money, and it's important that I'm seen to be very wealthy." But there's a very important, many of you have read Moby Dick. Moby Dick is, I think, one of the 2 or 3 greatest novels ever written, Herman Melville. On his grave in Western Massachusetts, and I mention this somewhere in the book, his epitaph is, "You have what you gave, you had what you spent, you lost what you kept." So everything you've given, that will always be part of you and always be part of your balance sheet. Every bit of philanthropy, of generosity, everything you've given in terms of time, talent, treasure, that's always going to be something that remains with you and your character. And I do believe that. And I think that's something that you want to inculcate in children in terms of carrying the power of giving and how it's an important element in values. And I think it's particularly true today because philanthropy, for some reason, with the polarization of wealth in the world between the rich and the poor, but philanthropy is actually declining as opposed to increasing.
Well, I think that's, and as you see, you seem to be able to predict my questions exceptionally well.
We did
this
not. We
evening,
did not.
We
This
know
is not.
all of this is
This is
done
not choreographed as well as it
entirely,
looks. Believe me.
entirely off the cuff. I've never met the man before in my life. This book has been called a book for our times, and as I said in my introduction, went on far too long, is we're not living in the best of times. Do you accept that?
I think we're living in a period. I was very depressed this past week because I read. Those of you who read the Financial Times, you would have read the big read last Thursday or Friday about the juxtaposition of Senator Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism in the United States. And of course, his mentor was Roy Cohn. And of course, Donald Trump's mentor was also Roy Cohn. So we're living in a period where freedom of speech, democracy, and a whole series of other issues are being challenged. And you see this in history, pendulums swing. And you and I have known each other for 40 years. We've seen the city evolve. At times, governments play leadership role when you have people like Thatcher or Blair. You have other periods in time where big corporations play leadership roles. You're now entering a period, I think, where individuals, and ironically, somewhat serendipitously, the book tries to suggest if people have views on problems in society, they've got to take more into their own hands, as sort of encouraging people to be a little more activists from a humanitarian point of view about trying to address issues for the common good, not to trust and rely as much on government, on corporations, or on wealthy individuals or foundations. I think it's trying to basically empower people through giving to play a much more dominant role in shaping society.
And creating societal pressures on others to do the same?
Peer pressure takes on different forms. I think the most powerful type of peer pressure is powerful role models. I was always heavily influenced by people like, many of you will remember Cardinal Hume, Basil Hume, who really defined for a lot of us what the word shame meant. And he, said to me a number of times, people forgot what the word shame means. And it was like shame on society for letting all these homeless people sleep on the piazza at Westminster Cathedral. And when you meet somebody who's a strong role model, and we've got strong role models in society right now, and there's going to be more, I think, as a reaction to the current state, where people will have very strong role models, and people are either going to react positively to role models or they're going to react negatively to role models.
Talking of role models, you've known a number of popes in your time. I think go all the way back to Pope John Paul II.
John Paul II, yeah.
How is Pope Leo shaping up to the new challenge?
How is Pope Leo shaping up?
Given he gave his first interview last week.
Yeah, Pope Leo.
Sorry, I threw a low ball there.
No. It's fine. I'm just trying to think about this because he's relatively new. He's got his cards close to the chest. He's appointed very few people so far. Remember, he's not part of the Vatican infrastructure. He ran a missionary organization for 20 years in Peru. Then he ran the Augustinian order, religious order, in Rome, but not in the Vatican for 12 years. And he only became a cardinal and went into the Vatican in 2023. So that's less than 2 years ago. And for those of you who know anything about the Vatican, if you've read Name of the Rose or anything like that, or Conclave, they're not inaccurate. There are layers of complexity of the Vatican, and he's American, but he spent a good portion of his life outside of America. So he has a lot of American values. Those of us who know him call him Father Bob. Still, as a matter of fact, I did this the other day, completely not by mistake. You're supposed to call him your Holiness, and I called him Father Bob, not even thinking, and it was totally inappropriate. But he is a Father Bob when you know him. He speaks, and it's so wonderful to have an English-speaking Pope. And what's really wonderful about it is, and I think this is one of the reasons why he was chosen, he understands missionary work. He ran the part of the Vatican that chooses bishops, so he knows about discernment and about leadership at the grassroots level globally. And remember, there were 131 people who voted for the Pope. 111 of them were appointed by Pope Francis, and Pope Francis chose people from all over the place, and he refused to appoint cardinals in very established Catholic places like Milan and Paris. He was trying to make a point about the hinterlands. So during the period between the death of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo, all the popes give, a number of cardinals give talks, and Pope Leo gave a very good talk, of course, in English and Italian, in both languages. And most of the people who voted, of course, almost everybody who voted understood English, and not everybody understood Italian. But because of his background being a missionary, when you're a missionary, that is the ultimate job, shoveling shit. It is a hard, hard job being a missionary. And for 20 years, he was arrested. He watched some of his people being beaten. So he's really seen what I call, he's been in the boiler room of the church. And then you go to the other extreme of running a religious order from, St. Augustine. And some of you probably read the Confessions, which is an extraordinary book. And then you go from that to sitting in the Vatican, appointing bishops. So if you were to pick someone based on the CV, he would have certainly been in your top 5. I think he was chosen. There's a lot of reasons why he was chosen. I'm not going to get into all of them. But he was chosen in part because he was seen as someone with the right background. And also, it was time. Many people felt there would never be an American Pope. I certainly never felt there would be an American Pope in my lifetime. And I think people felt we had an American Pope who spoke English, who was going to become very user-friendly, and it was going to be very good, not just for the church, but for the world at this point in history. And when you look already with what he's done, he's stood up to some of the personalities in the world today, and I think he's going to stand up to them even more.
That's what we look forward to that. I think and going back to your earlier, you said more role models will emerge over time. But added, this being a message to everyone on how they can contribute. Are there more signs of hope you can see in society and the development? In this country, I've been, for various personal reasons, really taken aback by the enormous amount of quiet volunteering that goes on either a personal level or a charitable level throughout the country. But are there more signs of hope that you see like that, in other words, in otherwise fairly grim times?
I think if you look at the data, going back to my joke about the snowflake generation, Generation Z, or Generation Z in America, that generation their usage of social media is actually starting to decline. Their re-engagement with people one-on-one is going up. Their engagement of faith or spiritual oriented organizations is going up. Prayer and meditation is ticking up. So they're reacting to the coldness of social media, and they're re-embracing humanity. There's a chapter in here called The Power of Two, where I strongly recommend people to become mentors and mentees in a whole range of things in life, particularly in different types of giving initiatives. And I think what I found in talking to a lot of people in that generation, they're already becoming much more focused on re-engaging in the power of two. So I think that's where it has to start. It has to start it goes back to something, and some of you have heard me say this many times. When I worked with Mother Teresa, she would say over and over again, you can only change the world one person at a time. So you can have all these grand plans. Some of you probably work in big projects and you have metrics everywhere. Metrics drive me crazy because metrics almost take the face off of individuals. And behind every metric is dozens of people or hundreds of people. And they're human beings. And you have to remember you can only help or change the world one person at a time. And I think you can't forget that. And because people want to, the best use of money. Well, that's why I've seized on this book to say philanthropy is not about money. Actually, it's the opposite. If you have the right idea and you have the right talent and you have the right series of ideas, whether through technology or tenacity or time, the money will come. But don't start with money, because what money is about it's checkbook philanthropy. It's a very cold transaction. A lot of you get invited to things, fine. How much do I have to pay not to go? And you write the check, whether it's £10, £100, £5,000. But that's a transaction. That's not necessarily philanthropy or giving. And I make a big distinction in the book between charity and philanthropy. Charity is giving someone a fish. Philanthropy is teaching them to fish. And you have to decide in your own mind where you want to be in that spectrum. Do you want to be giving people fish, or you want to be teaching them to fish? And you have to think based on your own talent what you might be better at.
Given this book is about a community and creating a community, I think I'm going to ask now, I know quite a few people have questions. I'm going to open it up to the floor. Catherine.
What is the inflection point where people go, I want to give back? What was it for you, and where do you think it lies now?
I think giving is, it's about creating some sense of purpose in your life, and channeling your resources. In May 1987, I was in a car accident, and I talk about this a bit. And I lost a lung, and I broke my arm in 62 pieces, and I was in intensive care in a hospital in Germany for 10 days. There were 9 other people in the car crashes, and they all passed away. So I was the only one who lived, and I came out of that thinking, someone's decided I'm not supposed to leave the planet yet. So I have got to, I've got more to do. I've got more to do. And I think, I think we all, maybe it's, my mother also said something to me when I was like 5 years old. We were walking down the street of Boston, and we were walking through the public gardens. And this man was there, and he was terribly frail, and she just started talking to him, and she tried to determine why he was frail and everything else. And he clearly he was disoriented. And after we sorted him out and we got a policeman to take him to a shelter, she turned to me and she said, just remember one thing. You should always be prepared when you feel like you're in the presence of God. You should always be prepared to give the shirt off your back. And it was like, my God, the presence of God, the shirt off your back. And that was like a lightning bolt to me, and I never forgot that, and I still believe that today. And I see people on the streets of London, or I do a lot of work in modern slavery and trafficking. I see people around the world with some of my religious sisters in places like Nigeria or Sudan, and they are fearless, and they see the face of God in very poor, marginalized people. And so it's not about giving. And it's very funny because you're there, you've been given certain gifts, and you feel as though you have to share them. There's a wonderful line in Hebrews 13 in the Bible called Angels Unaware, which I'm always obsessed with. You never know when you meet a poor homeless person on the street, you may in fact be helping an angel. And it may be a way of God testing you to see just what type of person you are. And I think we all are tested in so many ways, and we don't often realize it.
Alex.
When you've been dealing with your corporate clients, do you look across the table and are values important there, or is it just a transaction?
No, the most important thing with clients is trust. And I'm very focused early on building trust. And to this day, some of the most strongest client relationships I have, I mean, I was in New York the last 5 days. And Saturday night, I was in the Lowell Hotel. I was staying there, and I was in the lobby, and there was a private room, and the doors open, and it was the Emir of Qatar who saw me and said, "Oh, John, come in." And then there were all these people there from all over the Mideast who I knew, and they were all talking about stories of how they were immediately focusing on telling me about their families. And, you know, people at the end of the day are human beings. And I always felt that, you know, I would never, if we didn't have the human side of Wall Street, I would have left Wall Street a long time ago. I mean, I started Morgan Stanley June 4th, 1980. And I thought, this is going to be a short thing, because I thought some of the people I was working with were real shits. And the reality was, I got to know the clients, and the clients, as soon as a client, you build your trust, and trust, that's a whole other book, is how do you build trust? Because trust is one of these things takes a long time to build, and you can shatter it in 5 seconds. But trust is the most important thing, and you probably sense that.
Sam.
Hi. I dislike metrics as much as you do, but you mentioned Cardinal Hugh. So the last time I walked past the cathedral in Westminster, there were still homeless people, because you can give, but actually if it's not making a difference, I think people will ask what's the point.
Well, you're right. The homelessness right now, partly because the government has cut subsidies and funding for it, and secondly, we're having a row with the police right now, because right now all those people on Westminster Plaza are being, many of them are being bullied by gangs in Westminster and Mayfair to become actually drug dealers. And we've had a real row with Mark Rowley saying, look, rather than parking police vans over near Whitehall, and there's no crime over in Whitehall, park the police vans on the van and deal with this. There are 5 or 6 big homeless initiatives in London. There's the Passage, Cardinal Hume Centre, St. Martin in the Fields, St. Mungo's, Centrepoint. They all have different strategies. They all complement each other. There often are people on the street who don't want to be, they don't trust being in a project. Some of them are mentally unwell. And we can, again, this is another big subject, but you can almost bifurcate homeless 40 and under. It's like the Jesuit expression, give me a homeless person 40 and under, and I will find a way to get that person back into the workforce, either through community living or a job or volunteering. I used to run something called Business Action on Homelessness for the Prince of Wales, and it worked really well. Mary knows this. Because we were very good at giving people jobs, training them on life skills and getting them jobs at Sainsbury's or Tesco's, or working with one or more other types of jobs where they could do it. Now, if you're over 40, your life, it's more complicated, and there aren't as many projects for that. But it's an area that London is actually better at than most. But I would also say, as the sisters have always taught me, the poor will always be with you. You will never get rid of the poor. And it's a frustrating thing, because the sisters so far in my whole lifetime have been right.
My question was about role models. You spoke about role models, and I just remember, also you talked about social media and the negative impact it's had. So how do we get media to help us with this? Do you have any other ideas about what we can do to
Well, there's several several grandchildren, I've had to deal with Bluey and Postman Pat and some of these other things. But you know, I think what children children do respond to my experience with children is they're much more observant than adults are, and they notice many more things than you think they do, and they certainly notice things, whether it's how you treat an animal, whether it's how someone treats you. So I think it's a lot of it comes down to actually how much time you spend with children, how much real time you spend with children in terms of, granted, you've got to outsource certain things because you can't spend 24 hours a day with children, but that doesn't work. But the fact that children do witness a lot, and you can't, and you've got to be mindful of that. And you want them to be exposed to things like being kind to a dog, like being kind to an animal, being, you know, people being kind to each other. And, you know, I've taken, one of my stepdaughters has a 4-year-old son, William, and I've taken him when he's in the park with me and we meet someone who's homeless. Sometimes I will walk and he'll say to me, he calls me Judgy, should we go talk to that man? And so sometimes if I decide the man looks like he's not gonna be aggressive, we'll go talk to him. So he's used to me wanting to talk to them, so he's asking me if we should talk to them. So children do mimic their parents or their grandparents more than perhaps you realize.
John.
Is there such thing as a talent for asking? What is the definition of a good ask?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it's, in some respects, it implies if you're asking someone for, it depends what you're asking for, and you have to go through what I call the art of tactical empathy. And tactical empathy is you have to spend careful time putting yourself in the person's position and saying, okay, how is Sally Tennant, based on who she is, going to respond to this request? Is she interested in music? Is she interested in visual art? Is she interested in helping the poor? And you know, sometimes I would turn it around and start with, tell me about when you talk, you know, talk about to people about what are you interested in terms of your own, you know, tell me about your own giving. Where do you give your time or your talent or your money? And ask people that. And I always ask them those questions first before asking them for something cold, because you can always get people involved. People will always want to get involved if you're interested in their time, because, you know, and I always tell young people, if someone just asks you for money, say, no, before I give you money for the passage, I'd rather explore the option of volunteering. And if the organization doesn't want you to volunteer, well, then that's probably not something you want to be involved with, because ideally, it should be a long-term. There's the transaction, which is, I talked about charity, but if you want some type of ongoing engagement or partnership, then you should want them to get involved in something that is, you know, and I think people should invest time in organizations. Go, and you know, one of the things I've done with the Passage over 45 years is I've bounced between being on the board. I'm now in the phase of volunteering. And I started volunteering, then I went on the board, then I went back to volunteering. And I'll tell you, it makes the board really nervous when you have someone who's been on the board who's volunteering, because you see when you're volunteering and you're on the street, you see what's happening in the grassroots part of the organization. And then you go back to the board, and then you can have a different impact on how the board sees the whole organization. And it's important, if you want to stay involved in an organization for a long time, that you see it from different windows and different perspectives. So I think, to answer your question, I think you've got to put yourself in the other person's position first before you ask, because you'll never get a no. I always take the view, you may not get a yes, but you want to avoid getting a no. And you have to sort of decide, how am I going to avoid getting a no?
You're going to ask somebody who's incredibly busy, and they haven't got time for you to ask them about their philosophy. I mean, if I go to talk to Vivian Duffy to ask her for something,
No, but you can look her up online and find out what she gives money to. That's a good.
But that's all work you do in advance.
You should do that in advance. Exactly. You should do that in advance and know.
Absolutely.
But you said, but the other, to your point, Christopher, it's a very good point, and that's a good example. You can say, I think based on your experience, Vivian, I'd be interested in your perspective on this project and how I'm handling it and what you think I'm doing right and wrong, and get her perspective. And then you get some insights from her. Experienced donors will have a point of view. And you're right, people don't have time. But generally, if people give you a little time, even if it's a half an hour or 45 minutes, that can be very insightful.
Go on,
Okay.
the other half of the concept.
Is how do you ensure that the talent for giving is not a talent for control?
Well, there are some, I can write a book on all the big egos I know. And, one of the big ego questions with people like is, some people like to do vanity projects. Okay, you know what a vanity project is? It's your name is on a big building, but are you interested in having your name on a building, or are you interested in education? Are you interested in healthcare? Are you interested in building a hospital? Are you interested in vanity? And but you can quickly determine that.
But then how do you get the money out of them if they don't want to control it?
I mean, I had lunch with her 2 weeks ago in Seattle, and she is genuinely interested in entrepreneurial giving, because she gives people at the beginning of their projects, before they've become too cost-laden or too structured. But I think, to your point, Sally, it's a very good point. There are people who, and many of these, it depends. If they're leaders and they want to lead a project, they're probably going to probably create something. I mean, look at someone like James Dyson. James Dyson is very generous. He was very generous to me when I was the governor of the Royal College of Art. We have the Dyson Building, but he's also felt that technology in the UK, that no educational facilities were training young people on software engineering and programming. So he built his own university himself with his own money. So and it doesn't say the Dyson whatever, but it's part of Warwick University now, but it's his initiative. So I think you have to determine early on. There are big egos, and I try to avoid them, because those people, and a lot of them have enormous sums of money, but I think that's going to become very, I don't think that's the future. I think the future is more the beneficiaries and how the beneficiaries have been changed. When I look at Schwartzman Scholars, what Steve Schwartzman has done, Schwartzman Scholars is great, where people can spend part of their curriculum in Beijing and actually learn. It's the Chinese equivalent of the Rhodes Scholarship, and that's been very powerful.
Ian, lovely to see you.
Surely a commitment from Warren Buffett or Bill Gates to give away their entire fortune is surely more valuable than any number of people giving up their time and their talent.
Well, okay. Let's start with. I've met Elon Musk 3 times, so I can tell you about him. He is the classic disruptor, and he really is. Gates and Buffett are committed to give their fortunes away. They have big foundations, particularly Gates does, big cost structures. And I would say you have to look carefully at what they're trying to accomplish. It doesn't, you know, I'm not going to take anything away from them. They're having big impacts. Particularly, Gates has had an enormous impact in Africa to deal with issues like malaria, for example. Major issues, transformational, what I call transformational philanthropy in terms of public health impact. Big impact. But that's been over being ruthless and relentless. That's my point about tenacity over decades, actually. He's been doing that for 20 years or 30 years. He's been really very tenacious. So there's a lot of money. But that started, remember, that started with a vision as to where he wanted to channel, what problems he wanted to solve. So it still started with the problem, followed by the money. He didn't sit there and say, I have all this money, where I'm going to do it. He had to research and figure out what the problems were. And actually, Warren Buffett has pretty much copied the model that Bill Gates has built, and they donate to the same projects. Elon Musk is, he sees himself, in the book I talk about Ben Franklin, because Ben Franklin is one of my heroes, and he has had very clear views on philanthropy and giving. But Elon Musk is the ultimate disruptor. He sees himself as a Ben Franklin. He sees himself as a Thomas Edison. He sees himself as creating a world. See, he's already over here. He doesn't expect we're all going to understand how he's going to get there, but he's already there. And he's going to create a world where the majority of the people aren't going to have jobs because so much is going to be done by artificial intelligence. But it's going to be a society where everybody will have approximately the same degree of income and the same degree of lifestyle. So he almost has this neo-socialist mindset of how he's going to get there by spending, extraordinary amounts of money on whether it's going to outer space or a whole range of other disruptive issues. I mean, he's also someone, if you ask him for money, you might get it, depending on what it is, because he is very interesting in, you sort of want to hug him because he's all over the place, but he is, he does have views about leadership and history. He loves Ben Franklin. He loves Leonardo da Vinci. When you just pick 2 or 3 people, most of these are the people that Walter Isaacson has written about. Leonardo da Vinci, Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, and now Elon Musk. So that's actually why he chose Walter Isaacson to write the book, because all the people, he's like interested in the art of science and the science of art.
You sound quite conflicted about him.
I'm not conflicted. No, I think he's, it's quite interesting. I think, I think he's very similar to Ben Franklin in that Ben Franklin in his day was a very complicated character. He's the only member of the founding fathers of the United States that signed all 3 documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. And he also cleverly went to France and raised the money to subsidize the American Revolution. So very wily character, way ahead of his time, had a terrible personal life, not great to his son or his wife. So you compare him to Elon Musk and you sit there and say, some of these people that are big disruptors, you can't judge them. Who am I to judge? But that's why I'm not conflicted. I sort of think I can understand where he's coming from.
I have promised an hour, and the hour is now more than up. I'd like to thank, first of all of you for coming this evening, and particularly for having a really good debate. When I shut up, I would thank the whole team, and Jack and the whole team at H Advisors for setting this up, and as ever putting on a great spread for us. And I would like to thank all of John's team for making this event happen, because his schedule is mad. I mean, Pope Leo has more downtime than John Studzinski. But most of all, I would like to thank you, John, for spending time with us.
Thank you for
fantastic
organizing it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.